for now, I'll give the floor maybe to Robert Blasiak, and please excuse me if the pronunciation is not right. Robert is also a researcher at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, where he focuses on the sustainable management of ocean resources and ocean stewardship. His recent work has dealt with the issue surrounding the conservation and equitable use of marine genetic resources, as well as dimensions of ocean risk and resilience. He co-leads the Center of Human Ocean research team together with Susa. And I think, yes, you're also one of the co-author of this interesting report on ocean risk and resilience that you will go through, I think, in your talk. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Patricio. And I'll just give you the mnemonic device for remembering how to pronounce my name. It rhymes with maniac. So Blasiak, maniac. That's one for you too, Susa. I know we work together, but I've never mentioned it.
That will stick, thanks.
Yeah. Well, so I'm not a member of Mission Atlantic, so it's an extra treat for me to learn about this. And it's just super ambitious and really fun to listen to. But I was invited to say a bit about the ORRAA project and specifically these 3 reports, which were led by colleagues of mine. So let me tell you a bit about this. So first of all, ORRAA, what is it? It's another acronym, but it has something underneath it all. So it's aiming to pioneer innovative finance products that drive investment in marine and coastal natural capital, reduce ocean and climate risk, and build resilience in coastal communities. What else? It brings together the finance and insurance sectors, governments, nonprofits, and stakeholders in the Global South to co-design these things. And these are the current funders, and there are a lot of partners in this consortium, but these are the funders right now. And they have a big website where you can go into all the detail on this if you're curious to learn more. But the main goals, it's just a little thing that they're trying to do. So first, they want to secure $500 million in investment into ocean-focused nature-based solutions by 2030, surface 50 new investable and scalable financial products that drive that investment, and build the resilience of at least 250 million people and communities adapting to climate change. So it's also a very ambitious project, but I mean, these are big numbers, and they've tried to categorize all of this across 3 different areas. So practice and innovation, science and research, and policy and governance. And our little piece of this puzzle is in the science and research part. And that's where these 3 reports come in. So let me just introduce these briefly to you. The first was led by my colleague Jean-Baptiste Jouffret, also at the Stockholm Resilience Centre. And he's the brains behind the Blue Acceleration, which he dove into in more detail in this report. So you saw Susa already put up these hockey stick curves. So this just adds a few numbers to them, just showing the percentage increase just over the last 20 years, to put some perspective on some of these things that are growing so rapidly. And when you see growth levels like this, it kind of starts ringing alarm bells. Do we have control over these trajectories? Are we able to bend them if need be? And it's not just that you have these hockey stick curves. If you look at them with a magnifying glass, for instance, at hydrocarbons, you can see that there are these curves. This will be a little bit more familiar for capture fisheries, that you have this big increase and then a bit more kind of stagnation, maybe at a kind of a ceiling of extraction. But then as these limits get reached, extraction gets deeper and deeper. So this is the extraction at deep levels and at ultra deep levels. And this is where also the risk gets more and more intense as you try to do drilling in deeper and deeper environments. So this is also an alarming development, I would say. But there's also the question, the Blue Acceleration, for whom? I mean, we can look at it globally, but it's also interesting to look at small island developing states, that's another one of these acronyms, SIDS, and least developed countries, LDCs, and see what piece of the pie they make up in these in all these curves. So if you just look at GDP, population, coastline, EEZ, this is showing, so the dark blue is just showing the proportion of SIDS and LDCs among these things. But then if you look at some of these hockey stick curves, so what proportion of offshore wind farms are in SIDS and LDCs? Well, it hasn't started there yet. This is really a thing mostly in the Atlantic and a little bit in a couple other places, but it hasn't really taken off in these countries yet. Marine genetic resources, marine aquaculture, just scratching the surface, shipping a bit more, and then maybe some of these other numbers will be a bit surprising. So deep hydrocarbons, for instance, you may look at this and say, well, but really? Are SIDS and LDCs so involved with this? But this is almost exclusively Angola and Trinidad and Tobago make up almost all of that 9.2%. I'd say maybe 9.1% is those two countries. And similar with deep sea minerals, this is one of these kind of unusual mechanisms where basically these contracts are being granted to groups of countries. And there are a lot of questions about equity and also about just how legitimate these contracts are and how much of a voice the SIDS partners or LDC partners have in these contracts. Funding for SDG 14, this is also an interesting thing to look at. If you look at all the SDGs in terms of how much support is going to them through official development assistance, SDG 14 comes right here at the bottom. And once again, if you look at these darker pieces of the bar charts, that's the SIDS and LDCs component compared with everything else. So I won't spend a lot of time on these key messages. I mean, this is pretty much what I've just introduced, but this will be shared also in the PowerPoint if anyone wants to go into more detail. The second report looks then more specifically at risk in SIDS and LDCs and was led by our colleague Kanai Tokunaga, who's a researcher at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. And Kanai used a vulnerability assessment also to look, this is just one of the figures from the paper that I pulled out, to plot out the adaptive capacity and the sensitivity of SIDS and LDCs compared with other countries. And basically, where you want to be is high adaptive capacity and maybe low sensitivity. So you want to be somewhere up here. And these dark gray ones, these are basically the OECD states. But then you see that SIDS and LDCs, they're scattered across the rest of the graph. So it isn't a one size fits all or a simple narrative. There's a lot of diversity among these groups. I think it's no surprise to anyone on this call. Key messages from this is also some points that Kanai put together to share, that ocean risks are coupled complex risks. Efforts to quantify risk and vulnerability must pay more explicit attention to the coupled complex nature of ocean risks. And the complexity of that risk is also mirrored in the complexity of resilience, which is multidimensional and dynamic. And strengthening the scientific and technical capacities as well, integrating indigenous and local ecological knowledge can promote resilience, sustainability, and equity. It's a big meaty report with a lot of detail, so dig in if this sounds interesting to you. The third report goes even a level deeper. So this was led by our colleague Colette Wabnitz, who's based in Vancouver at UBC and with the Stanford Center for Ocean Solutions. And Colette looked then more specifically, not just at SIDS and LDCs, but gender dimensions of ocean risk and resilience in these countries, and looked specifically at two sectors, at the tourism sector and at the fisheries sector, or the seafood sector. And I'll just show you a couple of the figures from her paper. So this is the first one that's looking at official development assistance over time. And one of the neat things with this is that the OECD tracks also all of these financial flows and assigns markers to them as well, if they have a climate focus, if they have a biodiversity focus, or for instance, if they have gender as a focus, as a primary focus or a secondary focus. So here, if you look at the top here, this is just showing the overall bilateral fisheries ODA over time for the last decade. And then this hatched part here, this is all of the projects that are designated for gender being either a primary or a secondary objective of the project. And this, to me, this is a real eye-opener because I feel like it's such a strong message that we hear repeated again and again, that it's important to think about gender when designing these projects, that they'll be stronger for it. And seeing that it's still just kind of stagnating and not becoming a stronger portion of the funding flows is quite a surprise. Another way to look at this is also the donor countries, so the countries that are providing this ODA. And this is just looking at those that have provided ODA that has these gender markers attached to it. And the size of the bubbles basically shows what percentage of the fisheries ODA had gender markers on it. So the big one here is Japan, and maybe you can find your country here. Sweden, I have to hide my head in shame. I'm not Swedish, but I'm based in Sweden. There we are. Key messages here. This also, I have to make a serious plug for this report because it's such an impressive and systematic overview and review of this area. And I think just having one slide on key messages, it doesn't do it justice. But seriously, go and check this out. It's really a great report. But there are a series of approaches that can be taken here also to improve the gender differentiated approaches and impacts of projects across these countries, and a number of suggestions here. So here's the link. I can also paste some more links into the chat if people are interested. I can say a bit more. I'm a co-author on these reports, but I wasn't leading any of them. But I can also connect you with the lead authors if it would be of interest. So thank you so much for having me, and I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much to illustrate in such a short time this impressive amount of work, indeed. And well, don't be afraid actually to expand on this recommendation and future challenges, because we are planning to have some of this brainstorming we are doing here today in a common document that maybe can be converted in some sort of a policy brief that we can hand over to the All-Atlantic research community. I have one quick question, hopefully on the ocean risk report part, dealing with the sensitivity score and the adaptability, if I'm not wrong. I was wondering, I mean, what are the actual tools to move countries along the two dimensions? I mean, what are the methods that maybe the managers can implement to make the system more resilient in such context? I don't know if the report went in that direction too, but would be nice to have your ideas about it.
Yeah, well, to some extent, and it also connects with Susa's presentation, because I think it matters a lot how you define these indicators. Because if you take a bunch of social indicators into account for the adaptive capacity scores, then those are exactly the areas you need to work on. And I think Colette's report is really important there, because it showed if there is a gender focus in these projects, that it is possible to reach the most at-risk and vulnerable parts of the population, which in general, when you look at natural disasters and things like this, women and children are the most impacted. So they're the most at risk in these situations. So having projects and approaches designed that are specifically tailored and bringing in the views and also the expertise of these groups is really crucial. So I think building ocean resilience, maybe it means just talking with more people that aren't usually included in these discussions.
Okay.
Sorry, there's more detail in the reports. I'm again not doing it justice. But...
Thanks to give us at least a glimpse about it.